One device, two displays. Is it any good? Today I want to introduce you to one of the weirdest tablet computers ever made, the Sony Tablet P. Sony is well known for its radical designs, and this is one of the shiniest examples of the Japanese company's ingenuity and originality. And just like many other Sony innovations, this one did not stick, and will forever remain a conversation piece rather than a truly practical idea. Let's take a minute to cover some of the boldest attempts at dual-screen devices. Before we talk about computers and tablets with two screens, it's worth mentioning the Nintendo DS, a device that predated all of these, launched way back in 2004. Being a small gaming console with very crude displays and a very weak processor, the DS succeeded because it could deliver good battery life and performance that was just good enough for mobile game titles. It was not until 2010 that computer manufacturers started experimenting with dual-screen configurations. The first device with two fully functional displays that I can remember is the Toshiba Libretto W100. This tiny computer incorporated a second LCD instead of a keyboard back in 2010. But it didn't take off, probably because of its short battery life, mediocre performance, and steep price. Toshiba probably knew that it doesn't have an ace with the W100, so it was launched as a limited edition that never became a true mass-market product. You see, making a device with two screens will always be more expensive than making the same thing with one larger display, and battery life will always be worse. LCDs are the major consumers of electricity in most gadgets, and having two screens with two separate backlights increases power draw significantly. The next year, namely 2011, was a good year for dual-screen devices. It saw the first dual-screen Android phone, the Kyocera Echo, launched on Sprint. The Echo was launched post-iPhone and failed miserably to gather any type of buzz around it. Kyocera, a company that was never known for robust designs, made the device extremely clunky and odd. I like it, but nobody else did, and the various bugs that Android 2.3 had did not help. Hell, it even failed while it was presented to the press. Kyocera did not have the required resources to customize Android to fit two displays, and Sprint did not have the power of Verizon or AT&T, and could not successfully push the device to consumers. The Echo remains a very brave attempt that sadly was not followed by any other manufacturer in the West. Japan, however, saw the much more handsome and powerful NEC Medias WNO5E launch in 2013, but that phone, just like most other NEC devices, never left Japan. Back to 2011 again, we finally see a fine example of a practical dual-screen device. Acer, a company better known for budget laptops, always made quiet attempts at innovating under the Iconia brand. The Iconia 6120 is a first, and to this day, the only full-size consumer laptop with two screens. Acer basically ditched the keyboard and the touchpad in favor of a second 14-inch display, identical to the main display, and added some software to cover for the need in a keyboard, a mouse, and make sure there's some added functionality to the second display. The Iconia had a beefy Core i5 processor that is fast enough even by today's standards, and from a practicality standpoint, it was surprisingly not a disaster. However, the 6120 was not a perfect machine. Its battery was relatively tiny, and still had to carry two displays. A real-world result of 2.5 hours was pretty shameful. The machine was also abnormally heavy because of the sheer amount of thick glass it had. Add all that to the fact that Acer couldn't resist cramming cheap TN displays instead of IPS ones to this laptop, and you can easily see how it ended up as a collector's item. Speaking of TN LCDs, let's take a moment to explain why with most dual-screen devices, IPS or AMOLED technologies are absolutely necessary. As you probably know, TN LCDs have terrible viewing angles and tend to fade when not viewed head-on. Some TN panels are so bad that even the short distance between the eyes of a human being can make the viewer squint, because each eye gets a different picture from the display. One gets a bright picture and one gets a darker picture. This phenomenon is apparent when using a really bad TN display vertically. With dual-screen devices, there might be situations where the viewer adjusts two displays in different angles. In such a case, one of the displays might be too faded to be viewable. The 6120 seemed to have suffered from the same problem, and you can also feel it with the Sony Tablet P. Another honorable dual-screen mention is the Asus Taichi Ultrabook. Asus always had some crazy experiments with convertibles. Remember the pad phones? And what about the Trio, an Android tablet docked into a Windows PC keyboard? The Taichi was a convertible in the body of a normal laptop. It had two IPS displays sandwiched on the lid, one facing outwards, which was a touchscreen, and one facing inwards, which was not. The two displays could actually be used at the same time, but only to show something to a person on the other side of the laptop, because the user obviously could not see both displays at the same time. Now we're getting to the Sony Tablet P. The Tablet P was launched in 2012 as one of the first Android-powered tablets, just a few months after the notorious Motorola Zoom. The Tablet P shared its specs with the Sony Tablet S, a more conventional tablet with a single 10-inch display, and the two ran Android 3 Honeycomb, just like the Zoom. Tech reviewers hated Honeycomb from the get-go. I don't know if it has anything to do with the Zoom hardware or software implementation, or with the fact that Honeycomb was really a disaster as it was portrayed. Most reviewers complain about stability, compatibility, and ease of use, and some complain about Honeycomb's new design. Personally, I think these critics were exaggerating. I used the Tablet P running Honeycomb for a few months, and didn't see it crash too often. Compatibility was a problem, and many apps indeed did not take advantage of the largest screen. But that was understandable given that the platform was new, and only a few devices ran it. Hell, at the time the iPad had the same problem, and even today, most Android apps don't take advantage of the real estate tablets have to offer. Now, let's talk about Honeycomb's design. To me, Honeycomb was the best looking iteration of Android ever. It was the first incarnation of the Holo design language, even before it was called Holo, and was the sharpest, geekiest, and darkest operating system I've ever seen. The on-screen button design, the clock font, the blue and black, all created a sinister, futuristic look that to me is way better than the childish, colorful interfaces Apple became famous for, and Google copied from it. Honeycomb was also way more practical than today's tablet operating systems. It had the notifications where they belonged, in the bottom right of the screen, and not way up there where it's hard to reach. Today's Android tablets waste tons of space, with two permanent bars that barely display anything and take up precious screen real estate. All this brings us up to the Tablet P itself. In my next video, I will take a closer look to see whether this thing was any good, and if it has anything to offer in 2017.